Hello and welcome, scholars. Today we're talking about marine life, the marine environment, Chapter 12, Oceanography. Good stuff ahead. Let's get right to it. So, we're looking at living organisms, marine species, how we classify them with their characteristics. We'll look at how marine organisms adapt to the ocean's physical properties, many of which we've been discussing thus far in the course. And then we'll talk about the divisions within the marine environment, how we classify them, what the difference is, and what key features are associated with each of these different positions in the ocean. What is life? Am I alive? Are you alive? Is this desk alive? Well, we have a basic understanding of what life is, very intuitively. But if we think about what is life, what binds us, well, on a chemical level, ribonucleic acid, DNA. All living beings share DNA, which is the chemical makeup. It is the genetic code, the digital code, from which we look a certain way. So, DNA creates the genotype. The expression of that DNA is the phenotype, which is the way that we look and the structure and the characteristics that we have in our morphology or our appearance. So when we classify life on physical characteristics. Everything in the universe, everything on Earth, is made of atoms. Atoms are the smallest unit of measurement that cannot be further split. And atoms make up elements. Elements make up compounds, so on and so forth, until you have the beautiful complexity of life as we know it on Earth. Inanimate objects, the desk, chairs, rocks, air, are made of atoms. Life is made of atoms, and there's a difference between living and non-living. Life consumes energy. The primary source of energy is from the sun. Certain organisms use that solar energy and produce their own energy, and others have to eat organisms who produce their own energy. We're talking about autotrophs and heterotrophs. And then we have a very specific definition from NASA that encompasses extraterrestrial life, because life may not be specific here to Earth. So living things can capture, store, consume, I guess that would be capture, transmit energy. Living things can reproduce, adapt to their environment, and change over time. This is evolution, as is the case of the giraffe. The one with the longer neck can eat the trees that are higher up and have more food. And the one with the shorter neck can't reach the food source, so the shorter neck giraffe doesn't reproduce. The longer neck giraffe does reproduce, and those characteristics move through history, through time, and they change. So natural selection, evolution happen on living organisms. Okay, very broadly speaking, there are three overarching domains. You could consider life to be the highest level for everything living, life. Underneath life, we have this classification of eukarya, archaea, and bacteria. Three domains. Bacteria are simple life forms. No nuclei. Archaea are simple microscopic creatures. And then we have eukarya that are complex, multicellular animals. DNA is within discrete nucleus. Okay, but we have a more updated version now. It used to be domains and kingdoms, but now the kingdoms, there are 6 kingdoms, and they include the 3 domains. So here we have a comprehensive view of all life on Earth with its 6 kingdoms: Animalia, Plantae, Archaebacteria, Eubacteria, Fungi, Protista. So it's protists, fungus, animals, plants, Archaebacteria, archaea, and bacteria. All life within these 6 kingdoms. Let's go through them. So eubacteria are going to be the simplest organisms, single-celled without a nucleus, and marine species that are eubacteria are cyanobacteria. Archaebacteria are microscopic. They're bacteria-like. These are primarily at hydrothermal vents. They're methane producers and sulfur oxidizers. And it's believed that these may have been the original life forms on Earth, and they're some of the most ancient life forms on Earth that are still persisting through to today. Plants are multicellular, complex, photosynthetic. We have marine species including surfgrass, eelgrass, mangrove forests, marsh grasses. Animals, complex, multicellular. They range from, in the ocean, simple sponges all the way to complex vertebrates. We've got protists. In the ocean, we'll have algae and protozoa. These are single-celled and multicellular organisms with a nucleus. One of the most important probably being diatoms, responsible for oxygenating so much of our Earth's environment, our Earth's atmosphere. Thank you to the protists. Then we've got fungi, molds, and lichens. And of course, mushrooms are the fruiting body of a fungus, of various types of fungi. Okay, so we've got these kingdoms. We've got life on Earth, and there's a lot of life on Earth. How do we describe it? Well, Carolus Linnaeus in 1758 developed the basis for how to classify organisms in his Systemae Naturalis. It was this pivotal work. It was basically like an old school Excel spreadsheet that he put everything together, before computers, of course, where he classified organisms based on physical characteristics. This became what's known as taxonomy, a systematic classification of organisms. It's now being updated utilizing genetic analysis and understanding the genomes and the similarities in not only physical characteristics, but the underlying genetic code that describes those characteristics. So kingdom is the highest order. I guess we have life above kingdom, but we've got kingdom, and then it's layered below. Phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Species is the fundamental unit. Populations of genetically similar interbreeding individuals make a species. Now you could think about the common name and then the Latin name, which is usually the genus species. Common name for people are humans, is humans. Our genus species name is Homo sapiens. Therein lies the difference. So, genus species for humans, Homo sapien. For dolphin, Delphinus delphis. For killer whale, Orcanus orca. For bat star, Asterina miniata. For giant kelp, Macrocystis porifera. Now, how are we related on this scale? Well, if we go up here from human and common dolphin, our common ancestor is the class Mammalia. Killer whale is also Mammalia. Not the bat star. The bat star is an animal, Animalia, and so we're all related through this phylogenetic tree based on taxonomy. Kelp is a protist, so we're not in the same kingdom as kelp. We are in the same spectrum of life, but a completely different kingdom. So this is how you can look at the classification of organisms and how they relate to one another and how far removed those relationships actually go based on these characteristics. Okay, let's take it to the ocean. There's 3 things happening. Organisms in the ocean are floating, they are swimming, or they're hanging out on the ocean bottom. Floaters are plankton. Swimmers are nekton. The bottom-dwelling organisms are benthos. 3 big distinctions. Let's talk about plankton. Plankton come in a variety of different sizes. They're microscopic. They're teeny tiny. There's a lot of them. There's so much plankton in the ocean responsible for oxygenating about 50% of our atmosphere. They help to control the ocean's water chemistry. They bring carbon from out of the atmosphere and send it down into the rock cycle. Sequester, that's the word. They sequester carbon from the atmosphere in the ocean. And there's two main types of plankton. Phytoplankton are autotrophs. They generate energy from sunlight. Zooplankton are heterotrophic. They eat phytoplankton. They're a little bit bigger than our phytoplankton. And these are a main food source for many, many marine species. They're very low on the trophic level. Phytoplankton is producers. Zooplankton would be primary consumers, so on and so forth. This is how you get biomagnification, bioaccumulation. When there's toxins in the water and it gets into the bottom of the food chain, it just grows and grows and grows, but that was another lecture. Other types, bacterioplankton, which are very small, vireoplankton, which are not very well understood, but they're floaters in the ocean that are viruses that help to control the population of phytoplankton, so it doesn't get too abundant. You can think about there being 50% of the biomass of the ocean with this very small amount of species, just a lot of them. There needs to be some sort of population control. If a marine organism lives its entire life floating, it's known as holoplankton, the entire life as plankton. If it has different stages of a life cycle, it's a macroplankton. Here in the case of the squid, it's a benthos in its eggs. In its larva, it becomes a floater, plankton. And then, as an adult, it becomes nectonic, a swimmer. So different species can utilize different areas during their life cycles. Macroplankton, so not all plankton is teeny tiny. Seaweed, giant kelp forests of seaweed can be, this one's known as sargassum, are macroplankton. Jellyfish are macroplankton. And then on the other side, we've got absolutely tinier than tiny, teeny tiny picoplankton. The bacterioplankton and the vireoplankton are examples of tiny plankton. Swimmers come in all different shapes and sizes. Most adult fish and squid are swimmers. They're independent. We have many marine mammals that are swimmers and marine reptiles that are swimmers. On the bottom of the ocean, the benthos, they're doing a few different things. We've got epifauna living on the surface of the seafloor. We've got infauna that like to bury into the sediments on the ocean floor. And then we've got nectobenthos, which like to swim or crawl through water above the seafloor. Most benthos are abundant in coastal areas where there is warmer waters and a larger range of diversity of environmental pressures, which would help move natural selection and evolution along. Some benthos live in the deep ocean, in the darkness, in the coldness, in the stillness, but most are going to be in these shallow water areas. Hydrothermal vents are so cool. Black smokers, really hot. Near areas of tectonic activity where water is making its way through the ground, becoming superheated from the magma underneath the surface, and then ejecting back out, depositing different minerals, and spewing lots of chemicals into the ocean. It's basically like the kidneys of the oceans, and specific species have developed. Bacteria like archaeon use the food and the chemicals, use the heat to produce food in this process called chemosynthesis. And then that supports other life down at these very hot vents. We didn't know about these until about 1977, which shows we're still learning so much about the oceans. It's incredible. If we're going to name and classify, then let's count and categorize and know exactly how much life is in the ocean. Well, to date, there's been roughly 1.8 million species of life overall cataloged, and it's estimated to be a significant undercount of how many actually exist. Every year, there's about 2,000 more species being added and discovered, and estimates say that the total number could be somewhere between 6 and 12 million. If you look at historical analysis from the sedimentary record, periods of high, periods of low, population, species richness, and where we are now. So there's still a lot to learn. There's still a lot. We definitely don't know everything, and that is for sure. There's way more species on land than the oceans, and that's due to the relative stability of ocean environments. On land, you have different ecosystems, different biomes. You have mountains, deserts, coast, inland. You have a whole range of features that are going to cause different environmental conditions to move evolution in certain directions. You also have continental drift and plate tectonics moving continents all over, separating species, bringing them together. And then the oceans are relatively uniform, especially when you get out into deep ocean. So there's less necessity for evolution to occur. Less adaptation is going to be required, leading to speciation. So when we get into the ocean environment, most marine species are bottom dwellers. 98% are benthic and 2% are pelagic. This is going to be the other area, which we'll discuss more later. The other area of the ocean. So you could think about benthic zone being the bottom and then pelagic being everything else. In 2010, there was an international project from over 70 countries working together. Cost lots of money, took a while to complete. 1,200 new species were discovered, including this cool hydrothermal vent crab that has hair on its arms, the Yeti crab that has hair on its arms that it can filter the chemosynthesizing archaea at those vents. So it was great because also we realized there was a lot of double-counted species, and this just helped to gain an understanding. If we want to assess the health of the world's oceans and the impacts humans are having on marine aquatic life, we got to know what's out there to begin with. Having a baseline is really important to enhance that understanding. 87% of known species are on land, 13% are in the ocean. That's a huge unequal number. Of those 228,000 marine species, 98% are benthic, 2% are pelagic. Wow. Most of the ocean species are on the ocean floor. That's a really cool, really interesting statistic. So we talked about this, but just to go over it, the marine environment is stable, and that's why you can have animals that look like, or reptiles that look like dinosaurs that have not evolved in millions to hundreds of millions of years because there isn't the pressure. Sharks have looked the same for 400 million years. There's no pressure for them to change. They're the top of the food chain. They're just doing their thing, being sharks, staying sharks, persisting as sharks for millions of years. It's really awesome. Ocean organisms are less able to withstand environmental changes, but the ocean environment doesn't change as often. This is important, though, because as the pH of the ocean is coming down, is lowering, because of the excess amount of carbon dioxide in the air from the burning of fossil fuels and the increased emissions, then it's significantly affecting marine life that aren't well suited to fluctuations in their environment. We're made of water, about 65%. Water is crucial and a necessary component of life. Different species have evolved different quantities of water inside of their biomass. And water is contained in protoplasm, substance of living matter. It's about 80% water. So depending on how much protoplasm you have will dictate how much water is in your body. Marine animals have lots of protoplasm, lots of water, and this helps them from drying out because they're mostly water. They live in water. When temperatures are warmer, substances' resistance to flow or viscosity decreases. When temperatures are colder, a substance's viscosity increases. Think of it like a jar of honey. If you put it in the fridge and it got cold, it'd be really hard to flow. If you heated it up in the oven, the honey would pour right out. Same thing in the oceans. That means that for certain species, it's harder to swim than in colder water than it is in warmer water. So species have adapted different appendages, and they've become very, very small to stay, as in the case of plankton, floaters. This also affects how much oxygen can be absorbed by their size. The larger the organism, the smaller the surface area to volume ratio is, which means the less ability that organism has to diffuse oxygen across their cells. Certain adaptations include appendages to increase surface area or oils to increase buoyancy to keep these marine organisms floating, because phytoplankton need the sun, so they got to be close to the surface. Zooplankton eat phytoplankton, so they've got to be close to the surface. If the swimmers or if the floaters sink, they're not going to be able to reproduce. So natural adaptations to helping keep these various organisms afloat. Nekton have developed specific body shapes that include a flattened body and a tapered back end, because when they're swimming through the water, they have the resistance of the water in front, and then it creates a hole behind them that the water has to rush around, so there's lots of drag. This shape that is developed that we see in walrus, turtles, penguins, fish has helped them to decrease the amount of resistance as they swim through the water, thereby utilizing less energy. Certain species in marine environments will reproduce through this process called broadcast spawning. It's where the eggs are released, the sperm is released, and they're taking advantage of certain areas in the water's viscosity to keep the zygotes suspended in air, and then for fertilization to occur and reproduction chances to be enhanced. All right, so it would make sense that there's a higher range and temperatures get warmer at coastal areas than it does in ocean areas. Even more so on land, and this has to do with the heat capacity of water, the different heat capacities of land versus water, and the relation to how close you are to land. In deep ocean, it's almost equal temperatures. It varies in the coast, and it varies significantly on land. Ocean temperatures are more stable than land for 4 specific reasons. The higher heat capacity, as we've described. There's evaporation, which removes heat. There's solar radiation penetrating only so far into the ocean layers, and then there's mixing. Ocean mixing is tremendously important for moving heat around the globe. I mean, that's one thing that oceans do. They distribute heat. They help to regulate global climate by the movement of ocean surface and deep water currents. certain species like these cute little penguins here are specially adapted to colder environments. Other species are specially adapted to warmer environments. We see in warmer environments, there's more appendages. The organisms there grow faster, live shorter, and reproduce more. And the floating organisms are smaller because it's harder to float. In cooler seawater, there's more biomass, and this has to do with upwelling of deep ocean currents that's bringing cold, nutrient-rich water to the surface that feeds the phytoplankton, allowing for these mega plankton blooms that really support the marine life food web. Okay, let's talk about some environments. So we've got these two terms, steno and uri. You can think about this as narrow and wide. Stenothermal organisms can only withstand a very narrow range in temperature fluctuations, as opposed to eurythermal can endure a wide range. So we're thinking stenothermal, deep ocean, eurythermal, coastal areas. Let's take this to salt, salinity. Haline is another term for salt. Stenohaline, very narrow range of variability in ocean salts proportions. And then euryhaline, very wide range. So the oceans are stable for the most part, but they still have some variability. Certain parts of the ocean have more variability than other parts of the ocean, and that difference has allowed for specific species to either get real comfortable with the lack of variability or say, okay, I'm more resilient to fluctuations in both ocean salinity and temperature. The oceans are salty. They have minerals that marine life needs. And there's a direct absorption and movement of these minerals from the seawater into the cells of these species through the process of diffusion. Minerals move into the cells, waste moves out of the cells. Now for water, it's osmosis. The membranes are semi-permeable. There's osmotic pressure in more concentrated solutions that prevents the flooding, the overhydrating, or the release based on the pressure outside and inside of the cell. This creates a few different scenarios. Isotonic, which would be the organism has the same exact salinity as the surrounding water. Hypertonic, the seawater has a lower salinity than the organism's fluid. Or hypotonic, the organism's fluid has a lower salinity than the ocean. So we can see this in an example of freshwater versus saltwater fish. And because of different relative proportions of salinity from the organism to the surrounding water, we have different methods for extracting the water. Freshwater fish have gills which absorb through the skin by osmosis. They urinate large volumes of very dilute waste products. Fish actually drink the water because they're hypotonic. The organism's fluids are less salty than the oceans being 35 parts per thousand. So they absorb through diffusion and then lose water by osmosis and urinate out small volumes of concentrated urine. Very specified, very specific to these specific environments. Fish, animals also extract dissolved oxygen through gills. It's kind of like the lungs of marine life. Gills exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide directly with the seawater, and this structure and location can vary among different types of animals. Okay, some specific traits. What's going on? Well, ocean water's clear. You can see, well, it's pretty transparent. You can see through it. More in some places than others for various reasons, nutrient content, sunlight, species that live there. But for the most part, you can see through water. Organisms know this, so they become transparent to elude prey and also to stalk their prey. In this image of the jellyfish, enlightened, illuminated by an external source of light, these are basically see-through. You can't even see them. Wouldn't even know it. That's how come you can get stung by jellyfish and not even know, ow, okay, ow, that hurts. What the heck is going on? I don't see anything. Well, it's because the jellyfish that is stinging you is see-through. It's invisible and you can't see it. Some benthos like to camouflage, look like the bottom of the ocean. Fish can have a dark top and a light bottom, so if you saw the fish from underneath, it'd look like the surface, and if you saw it from above, it would look like the bottom. So unique adaptations, counter shading, camouflage for specific marine life to the marine environment. The deep scattering layer is an area of concentrated marine organisms that are evading predators by moving down the water column about 1,000 meters during the daytime and up to the top of the water column to sea level in the nighttime. This is a daily process that happens for these marine critters to not get eaten by their various predators. Now this is so cool. Different species, lifting, lowering, it enhances mixing of ocean waters, and I mean, these still support different life, but then they also are protecting themselves by becoming in tune with the day's rhythms of sunlight and nighttime. Skip that one, just talked about it. So some fish can become very, very colorful. Now, exactly why? To blend into colorful coral, yes. To stand out to mates, possibly. To invoke fear in those around, maybe. So this is a marine adaptation. Still kind of figuring out, why do certain marine tropical fish have such beautiful colors? What a beautiful, amazing fish. So much detail. Wow, life is so amazing. Fish have evolved swim bladders that adjust the buoyancies to allow them to regulate depth, but they can't go too deep or else this will be crushed. So there are other adaptations like no air pockets or collapsible lungs that allow fish to go deeper, because the deeper you go in the surface, the higher the pressure is. And it's a lot. Every 10 meters down, it's about an increase in an atmosphere of pressure. So the pressure that we feel right now is 1. It would be twice the amount of pressure on us, 2, 3 times, 4 times every 10 meters deep we go. So we've got divisions of the marine environment. We've got the benthic seafloor and the pelagic, the open sea. Part of the pelagic is the neritic, less than 200 meters, and oceanic. So we talked about neritic, nearshore, pelagic, offshore. Now we're talking about the open sea and the bottom of the ocean. Pelagic environment has biozones, provinces, the neritic province, the oceanic province. So now we're getting into classification details of different components of the marine environment. If we think about layers with depth, epipelagic, this is where photosynthesis is happening. This is where we have lots of phytoplankton utilizing the solar radiation to produce their own energy. And so lots of biological activity happening up here. Below that is the mesopelagic, and to this point where there's an oxygen minimum layer. And then it goes bathypelagic all the way down to the deep ocean abyssopelagic. Certain Marine organisms create their own light in this process called bioluminescence. And this is common in deeper areas of the ocean where light does not penetrate to. So, okay, if there's no light, but you need some light, create your own light. This can be a deterrent. This can be used for various advantages for the marine species who have the bioluminescence. We can think about these zones of the pelagic environment as being euphotic, where enough light exists to support photosynthesis, dysphotic, small but measurable quantities, and then aphotic, meaning no light can make their way down. That happens at about 1,000 meters down. Benthic environments, this is going to be bottom environments. We've got the supralittoral, which is going to be above the shoreline. We've got the subneritic, which is going to be the high tide to 200 meters, about half the continental shelf. And then we've got the littoral, the high tide to low tide, the sublittoral, shallow subtidal zone, and then you've also got the inner and the outer sublittoral zones. So lots of different classifications for where different species can live, and it's going to be based upon where the tides are interacting with the coastline and the continental margin. Deep in the ocean, there are bathyal on the continental slope, abyssal, and hadal below 6,000 meters. So we went from supralittoral, above the ocean, through the littoral, sublittoral, down further bathyal, down further abyssal, way out in the middle of nowhere, and deep, only in deep trenches, 6,000 meters. All right, great stuff today. Marine life, marine environments, we talked about all of life and then focused in on marine life, on the floaters, plankton, the swimmers, nekton, the bottom dwellers, benthos, how they adapt, how they live in different parts of the ocean, and what those different components of the marine environment are. So this is an introductory conversation on marine life. We'll be talking about more of this in the chapters to come, but now we know what the basic premise is happening out there. Marine organisms can float, they can swim, they can be on the bottom. In fact, most species, 98%, are on the bottom, but then the biomass is 50% phytoplankton supporting all of the marine food webs. Great, thank you so much for your attention. I hope you enjoyed it and have a really nice day.